covered men, women, and now we've talked about fathers, so it felt inevitable we'd end up here. Mothers. And before I get into anything analytical, I just want to say this has genuinely been fun. Watching the comments roll in, seeing people disagree respectfully, seeing people bring their own parents into the conversation. That doesn't happen unless people are actually sitting with those ideas, and I really appreciate you taking the time with me. What surprised me the most is that across all those conversations, across all those videos, the same word kept surfacing: anchor. Once you notice it, you can't unsee it. If Ghibli fathers tend to act as bridges between children and the world, something I talked about pretty heavily in that video, then Ghibli mothers do something quieter and arguably more difficult. They don't guide you across the chaos. They hold the ground still while the chaos happens around you. That distinction changes how you read these films, because Ghibli mothers almost never explain the world. They rarely lecture, and they don't narrate danger. Instead, they regulate the emotional climate so that children can experience uncertainty without ever being consumed by it. And the more I thought about that, the more I realized this isn't just a writing pattern. It's personal. I mentioned this briefly in the Ghibli Women video, but I think it's worth slowing down and really sitting with it here. How Miyazaki had a complicated, deeply formative relationship with his mother. She was brilliant, strong-willed, and politically outspoken, but chronically ill for much of his childhood. That meant she wasn't always present in the way stories usually demand mothers be present. She couldn't hover. She couldn't always participate, and definitely couldn't be everywhere. But she was emotionally reliable, and that distinction matters more than we tend to admit. Miyazaki has talked about growing up with a kind of emotional steadiness that didn't come from constant reassurance or protection, but from watching someone endure quietly. Someone who carried pain without letting it destabilize the household. And someone whose presence was felt even when she wasn't physically there. Once you know that, Ghibli's mothers start to make sense in a different way. They aren't written as heroes, neither are they martyrs. They're written as environments. And that sounds abstract until you realize how often Ghibli uses mothers to stabilize reality itself. Think about how many of these films place children in situations that would feel overwhelming in almost any other story. Illness, absence, economic uncertainty, environmental collapse, supernatural disruption, and yet the emotional tone rarely tips into panic. It's not an accident, it's not nostalgia, and it's definitely not softness. It's structure. This is where it starts to overlap with my own life in a way I didn't fully recognize until I was older. My relationship with my mother has always felt like an anchor. Not because everything was easy, she didn't shield me from difficulty. I attribute it more to that even when things were hard, the emotional ground wasn't shifting under my feet. And as I got older, I started to realize how much of that stability came at her own expense. Sacrifice that wasn't performative, care that wasn't announced, and decisions made quietly for the long term, even when they cost her something in the short term. What's strange is that I don't think I would have had language for that if I hadn't grown up with these films. Ghibli gave me a lens. It taught me how to recognize that kind of care without needing it spelled out. It showed me that love doesn't always look like closeness. Sometimes it looks like restraint, and sometimes it looks like endurance. And once you start looking at Ghibli through that lens, the mothers stop feeling like side characters. They start feeling like the architecture holding everything else up. That's where this video is going. Not a ranking, not a highlight reel, but an attempt to understand why these mothers feel so grounding, why they stay with us, and why they quietly shape how we understand care in the real world long after the credits roll. And to get there, I need to start with the simplest and most overlooked question. What does Ghibli think a mother actually does? What Ghibli seems to suggest over and over is that a mother's role isn't to remove difficulty from a child's life. It's to make difficulty survivable. That idea shows up most clearly when a Ghibli mother is technically absent, but emotionally constant. My Neighbor Totoro is the cleanest example of this. And I think it's intentional that it's often the first one people return to when they talk about comfort films. Yasuko is sick. She's in the hospital. She's not available the way stories usually demand mothers be available. And yet the film never treats her illness as emotional instability. She doesn't collapse. She doesn't unravel. She doesn't make her fear her children's burden. When she speaks to Satsuki and Mei, she does something very specific. She reassures without pretending. She doesn't lie about being sick. She also doesn't invite panic. She smiles. She listens. She frames the situation in a way that keeps the emotional ground steady. That steadiness is what allows the rest of the film to exist. Because Totoro only works if the children are allowed to wander emotionally. If the adults were constantly panicking, the forest wouldn't feel safe. The imagination wouldn't feel like refuge. It would feel like escape. Ghibli refuses that framing. Instead, Yasuko becomes something closer to an emotional constant. Even when she's not on screen, her presence travels through letters, through memory and routine. Her care doesn't require proximity. It requires reliability. The Boy and the Heron presents a mother whose role doesn't end when she disappears. Hito's mother dies early, but the film keeps treating her as the emotional center of the story. Everything that follows is shaped by the space she leaves behind. The world responds to her absence by trying to compensate for it, almost like to reorganize itself around something new. A new household forms. A new maternal presence is offered. Even the fantasy world presents itself as a structure that could restore order and continuity. These aren't just random plot developments. They're the story's repeated attempts to fill the role she once held. And none of them quite work. What the film seems to understand is that motherhood, in this case, isn't transferable. Her care, her presence, the way she anchored the child's experience of the world can't be replaced without becoming something else. So the story doesn't resolve her absence. It lets it remain active. Because she isn't replaced, the world never really fully settles. The fantasy space bends and loops, offering meaning that never holds. The instability doesn't come from chaos or imagination. It comes from the fact that the emotional center that once grounded reality is gone. And there's no attempt to console the audience about this either. No lesson about moving on, just the quiet acknowledgement that some maternal bonds shape a child so deeply that their absence permanently alters how their world is experienced. And in that sense, the mother in The Boy and the Heron doesn't disappear from the story. She becomes its negative space, the presence defined by what can't be filled. And this is where Ghibli quietly diverges from a lot of modern storytelling. In so many films and shows, especially in the last couple decades, good parenting is framed as hyper-awareness, constant monitoring, emotional transparency to the point of oversharing. Anxiety then becomes proof of love. If you're worried enough, you care enough. Ghibli doesn't buy that. Ghibli argues that emotional regulation is contagious. Children learn how to experience uncertainty by watching how adults carry it. And mothers, in particular, are often the ones modeling that regulation. You see this shift clearly in Ponyo. Lisa is put in a situation that would break the tone of almost any other family film. The ocean is rising. Roads are flooding. The rules of the world are visibly collapsing. And instead of escalating emotionally, she does something almost absurdly grounded. She sings in the car. She jokes. She makes ramen. That ramen scene is doing far more work than it looks like. Food becomes structure. Routine becomes reassurance. The supernatural doesn't get denied. It gets absorbed into something familiar. Lisa never explains the danger to Sosuke. She doesn't narrate it. She doesn't sit him down and tell him how scared he should be. She shows him how to stay oriented inside chaos. And that's a very different model of care than what we usually see. A lot of modern stories frame motherhood as constant vigilance, as if safety comes from control, from being alert at all times, or from never letting your guard down. Ghibli pushes back on that too. It suggests that safety comes from composure, from having someone nearby who knows how to keep living even when the rules stop making sense. That idea hit me pretty hard the first time I really noticed it, because it mirrored something I didn't have the language for growing up. There were moments in my own life where things were objectively hard, times where the future felt uncertain, and what kept me steady wasn't someone constantly explaining what was happening. It was knowing that my mom wasn't unraveling in front of me, that she was carrying more than she let on, that she was making decisions quietly, often at her own detriment, so the ground under me didn't feel unstable. That kind of care is invisible unless you learn how to see it, and Ghibli teaches you how to see it. What's important is that this steadiness doesn't mean Ghibli mothers are gentle all the time. The films are very clear about that. Princess Mononoke makes sure we don't miss the point. Moro is not comforting. She's not warm, and she doesn't soften her worldview for the sake of nurture. And yet she is undeniably a mother. She protects Son with violence, with refusal, with teeth. She never apologizes for the world she sees, and she never compromises her values to make her love more palatable. Ghibli doesn't frame that as a failure of motherhood. It frames it as a different expression of it. That matters because a lot of stories quietly suggest that maternal love must look calm or gentle to be legitimate. And yet again, Ghibli rejects that outright. It allows mothers to be fierce when care demands it. And that range is crucial because it keeps motherhood from collapsing into a single archetype. Some Ghibli mothers stabilize through warmth, others through endurance, and others through ferocity. What unites them isn't tone, it's intention. They all act in ways that preserve the child's ability to exist in the world without being emotionally overwhelmed by it. That through line becomes even clearer when Ghibli shifts away from biological motherhood entirely. Osono in Kiki's delivery service doesn't rescue Kiki. She doesn't fix her confidence, and she doesn't sit her down for a heart-to-heart. She gives her work, she gives her food, and she gives her a space. When Kiki finally burns out, Osono notices it without dramatizing it. She doesn't turn Kiki's struggle into a crisis. She lets it be a season. That restraint is incredibly deliberate. Osono practices care without ownership. And that kind of motherhood, chosen rather than assigned, shows up again and again in Ghibli. It reinforces the idea that motherhood isn't defined by biology. And that's where this all starts to come together. Because Ghibli mothers don't exist to advance the plot. They exist to shape how we understand stability, care, and responsibility. And once you notice that, you start to see why these films feel the way they do. They don't feel safe because nothing bad happens. They feel safe because someone knows how to hold the center when it does. What really completes the picture is how Ghibli treats trust as the highest form of care. There's a moment in Ponyo that feels simple on the surface but carries a lot of weight once you slow down. Granmamare doesn't test Sosuke. She doesn't interrogate him. She doesn't surround the choice with conditions. She asks him if he loves Ponyo, and when he answers it, she accepts it. Then she steps back. That's important. Power doesn't rush in to correct the outcome. Authority doesn't override the child's agency. Trust replaces control. And that idea shows up again in the tale of the Princess Kaguya. Kaguya's adoptive mother knows what's happening long before she can stop it. She senses the loss coming, and instead of tightening her grip, she stays emotionally present. She supports her daughter even while knowing she can't change the ending. Ghibli frames that restraint as love, and that's a hard thing to portray honestly. A lot of stories equate love with intervention, or with fixing, or preventing pain at all costs. Ghibli suggests something more uncomfortable and more realistic. Sometimes love looks like staying steady while someone you care about walks into something difficult anyway. That perspective feels deeply connected to the way Miyazaki's films treat adulthood in general. Adults aren't omnipotent. Parents aren't gods. They are limited people doing their best to hold a stable shape in an unstable world. And mothers especially are written as the ones who absorb that limitation quietly. They sacrifice without spectacle. They endure without demanding recognition. They take on emotional weight so children don't have to carry it too early. And the films never romanticize that sacrifice. They simply acknowledge it as real. And that's the part that hits hardest for me. As I've gotten older, I've become more aware of how much of my own sense of safety came from things my mom never announced, decisions she made quietly, burdens she carried without transferring them onto me. Moments where the emotional steadiness we all relied on came at her own expense, and I genuinely don't think I would have recognized that for what it was without these films. Ghibli didn't give me a comfort growing up, it gave me a vocabulary. It taught me how to see care that doesn't look dramatic, how to value restraint, and how to recognize strength that doesn't posture. Those stories shaped one of the foundations of my relationship with my mother. They helped me see her not just as a parent, but as a person making long-term choices for the greater good of her children. And that's why these portrayals matter. Ghibli mothers don't save the world, they don't dominate the story, and they don't ask for praise. They make the world inhabitable. They hold things steady long enough for children to grow into themselves. They teach resilience through example rather than instruction. And they remind us that love doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just quietly keeps the ground from shifting under your feet. If you've watched the men video, the women video, or the fathers video, and now this, you can start to see the larger pattern of Ghibli is building. These films aren't just about characters, they're about ecosystems of care, about how people shape one another simply by the way they carry themselves through difficulty. And maybe that's why so many of us return to these movies when life feels loud, not to escape reality, but to remember what steadiness looks like.